Have you ever drunk milk straight from a cow? Not from a carton, not from a bottle, but the kind that's still warm, that smells of hay and the farm, that leaves a fatty trace on your lips? If you have, you know that after that, store-bought milk tastes like water with white food coloring. And if not, you don't even suspect what you're buying every day at the supermarket and what exactly was done to the product before it ended up in your fridge. Because between the cow and your morning cereal, there's an entire industry. And that industry really doesn't want you asking too many questions. Today, we answer one of the simplest and yet most uncomfortable questions about food. Why does store-bought milk taste nothing like raw milk? Let's start with the obvious. Milk is not just a white liquid. Fresh, unprocessed milk is an extraordinarily complex biological fluid. It contains fat, proteins, lactose, minerals, vitamins, enzymes, and even live bacteria. And all these components interact with each other, creating the very taste that humans have known for millennia. The fat in raw milk is not evenly distributed. It collects at the top as thick cream. If you leave a glass of raw milk for a few hours, you'll see a clear boundary between the cream and the liquid below. This is normal. This is natural. This is exactly how milk has existed for millions of years. But here's the problem for industry. Consumers don't want uneven milk. They want the same product every day. No surprises, no cream on top, no varying taste depending on the season or the cow's diet. And this is where the transformation begins. The first step is collecting milk from dozens, even hundreds of cows and mixing it in one tank. This already eliminates the individuality of each animal, each pasture, each day. You get an averaged product, without bright notes, without character, but this is only the beginning. Here is a process that most people have never thought about, even though it changed the taste of milk forever. Homogenization. It sounds harmless, even scientific. But let's look at what exactly happens. Milk is pumped under pressure of 2,000 to 3,000 pounds per square inch through microscopic holes, smaller than a human hair. This literally shatters the fat globules into tiny particles, 10 times smaller than their original size. Why? So that fat no longer floats to the surface, so that milk looks uniform, so that the shelf life is longer, so that you don't see unappetizing cream. But there are consequences. When fat globules are so small, they behave differently. They interact with proteins differently. Milk gets a different texture in the mouth, less fatty, more watery. And also, fat stored in the form of tiny particles oxidizes faster. This oxidation is one of the main flavor thieves. There's another little-known fact. Raw milk contains a specific protein, xanthine oxidase, which is naturally bound to fat globules. After homogenization, this protein is released into its free form. Some researchers since the 1970s have been raising questions about its impact on the cardiovascular system. But that's a topic for a separate video. The key point for taste: homogenized milk is a different product, chemically, physically, and organoleptically, that is, in terms of taste, smell, and mouthfeel. And now, the most controversial part. Pasteurization. Louis Pasteur in the 1860s discovered that heating a liquid kills dangerous microorganisms. This saved millions of lives. Without exaggeration, this is one of the most important discoveries in the history of food safety. But there's a nuance that producers prefer to stay silent about. Heat kills not only harmful bacteria, it also destroys beneficial enzymes, denatures proteins, breaks down some vitamins, and, most importantly for our topic, radically changes flavor molecules. There are several types of pasteurization, and this is where the real detective story begins. HTST. High temperature, short time. Milk is heated to 161 degree depth, 7 seat for 15 seconds. This is standard pasteurization. Milk after this keeps for 2 to 3 weeks in the refrigerator. UHT, ultra-high temperature. This is where things get interesting. Milk is heated to 280 degrees, 138 degrees, almost to boiling, but for only 2 seconds. After that, aseptic packaging and shelf life, from 6 to 9 months without refrigeration, 6 to 9 months, milk without refrigeration. If this doesn't make you ask questions, You haven't read to the end. UHT milk tastes noticeably different even from regular pasteurized milk. The high temperature triggers the Maillard reaction, the same one that happens when toasting bread. New compounds form between lactose and proteins. A slight cooked or caramel aftertaste appears. That's exactly why many people in Europe immediately recognize UHT milk by taste, and American and European consumers describe it as flat, dull, not milky. But there's another point, one that producers definitely don't advertise. During pasteurization, up to 20% of thiamine, vitamin B1, is destroyed, up to 25% of vitamin C, and partially vitamin B12 and folic acid. Vitamin D, fat-soluble, so it's more stable. But to compensate for losses, most pasteurized milk in the USA is artificially supplemented with vitamin D and vitamin A, meaning you buy a product from which nutrients were first removed and then synthetic versions were added back. And you pay for this as a natural product. Okay, but is this enough to explain such a striking difference in taste? No, because there are a few more things we're not talking about. Cow's diet. A cow that grazes on a green pasture and eats fresh grass produces milk with a bright, rich flavor. It contains more conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, more omega-3, more beta-carotene, the very thing that gives milk and cream a slightly yellowish tint. A cow that stands in a stall and eats corn silage, soy meal, and concentrates produces different milk. Whiter, less rich, with a different fatty acid profile. The vast majority of commercial milk in the USA comes from cows that barely see any pasture. Stress and living conditions. Studies show that cortisol, the stress hormone, is secreted into milk. Cows on large industrial farms, where one milking machine serves hundreds of animals simultaneously, are under constant stress. This affects the hormonal composition of the milk, and accordingly, the taste. Breed. Most commercial milk in the USA is from Holstein Friesian cows. They produce the maximum amount of milk, up to 20,000 liters per year. But this breed is a kind of sports sedan, optimized for quantity, not taste. Milk from Jersey or Guernsey cows is thicker, fattier, with a more pronounced flavor. This is exactly the kind of milk that small family farms produce. But such milk doesn't scale. It's more expensive. It doesn't fit the logic of industrial production. Time between milking and your table. Fresh raw milk is what you drink a few hours after milking. At most, the next day. Store milk? From the moment of milking to the moment it ends up in your mug, 7 to 14 days can pass, and for UHT milk, even more. During this time, fats continue to oxidize, proteins change structure, flavor molecules degrade, and you get what you get, a liquid that is theoretically milk, but no longer feels like milk. And what about raw milk? Why is it either banned or strictly restricted in most U.S. states? Here is where things get really interesting. In the United States, the sale of raw milk for consumption is regulated at the state level. About 13 states completely ban retail sales. In others, it's only allowed on the farm or through cow share programs, where you technically become an owner of part of an animal and receive milk as your share. The CDC and FDA claim that raw milk is dangerous because of the risk of bacteria, Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, and the risks are real. Outbreaks of infection from raw milk do occur, particularly vulnerable: children, pregnant women, people with weakened immune systems. But here is where the debate begins. Proponents of raw milk point out that it contains beneficial bacteria, probiotics that support gut microbiome, that it contains live enzymes, including lactase, which helps digest lactose, that many people who can't drink pasteurized milk due to intolerance drink raw milk without problems. There are studies, including large European ones, such as the Parsifal study and the Gabriella study, which showed that children who consume raw farm milk have a statistically lower incidence of allergies, asthma, and atopic dermatitis. But these studies are not proof of causation. Critics rightly note that children who grow up on farms generally have a different lifestyle, more contact with the natural environment, less urban stress. The scientific debate is not closed. And here's the paradox. In France, Austria, Switzerland, the Netherlands, raw milk is sold legally, including in special vending machines on the streets. In Switzerland, raw milk vending machines are a familiar part of the urban landscape. So the question is not just about science, the question is also about who decides what you have the right to eat and why. You think the dairy industry in the USA is a competitive market? Time to dispel that myth. 3 companies, Dean Foods, Dairy Farmers of America, and Land O'Lakes, control the lion's share of the U.S. milk market. Dean Foods declared bankruptcy in 2019, but its assets were absorbed by DFA. This consolidation means that independent farmers have very little leverage. They sell milk at the price dictated by the market, and this price is often below the cost of production. From 1970 to 2020, the number of dairy farms in the USA decreased from more than 650,000 to fewer than 32,000. The number of cows barely changed, but they're now concentrated on giant industrial enterprises. The average industrial farm has 3,000 cows. There are farms with 10,000 or more animals, and when you have 10,000 cows, you can't afford non-standard milk. You need standardization, unification, scale. Taste is the last thing you worry about, and marketing will take care of the rest. Have you seen milk commercials? Got milk? Happy children, white mustaches, healthy bones. Nobody talks about how many industrial processes this drink went through before ending up in the glass. So what to do if you want milk that actually tastes like milk? Option 1. Find a local farm. In most states where raw milk sales are permitted, there are farms that sell it directly. The resource realmilk.com, maintained by the Weston A. Price Foundations, provides a list of such farms across the country. Option 2. Milk from grass-fed cows. Even pasteurized but from cows that eat grass tastes significantly better. Brands like Organic Valley Grass Milk or Alexander Family Farm. This is a different category compared to regular store milk. Option 3. Pay attention to the labeling. VAT pasteurized or low-temperature pasteurized. This is milk heated to a lower temperature, 145 degrees, for 30 minutes. Enzymes and flavor molecules are preserved much better. Look for this label. It's rare, but it exists. Option 4. Milk from Jersey or Guernsey cows. It's fattier, thicker, and in taste much closer to what your great-grandparents drank. And finally, the simplest step. Just pay attention to the production date. Fresher milk, better taste. Obvious, but many people never think about it. So, why does store-bought milk taste nothing like raw milk? Because it's a different product. Not worse, in the sense of safety for most people. Not poison, but different. A product optimized not for taste, not for nutritional value, but for shelf life, transportation, and scale of production. Homogenization shattered the fat globules and changed the texture. Pasteurization killed some of the enzymes and flavor molecules and added a cooked aftertaste. The industrial diet of cows stripped the milk of its natural complexity, and weeks between milking and your mug did the rest. And while you drink your store-bought milk, somewhere there's a cow on a green pasture whose milk you'll never taste, because between you and her, there's an entire industry that decided what your milk should be like. Maybe it's time to ask, who exactly makes these decisions? And do you have the right to choose? If this video made you think, share it. And in the comments write, have you ever tried real raw milk? What's the difference? Until next time.